Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Since 1990, we have been observing February 5th as Kashmir Solidarity Day. We keep debating and protesting about the Kashmir issue without reaching any conclusive results. But where is Kashmir in our national agenda? Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif invited the Indian government to hold a peaceful dialogue to resolve the Kashmir issue according to the aspirations and will of the Kashmiri people. On the other hand, after East Pakistan, another global conspiracy in Balochistan is brewing. Recently, top U.S. delegation met two exiled Baloch leaders and assured them of the open and clandestine help in their activities in Balochistan and abroad. Does it mean American CIA, India RAW, Israeli Mossad have also accelerated their common conspiracy against Balochistan in order to obtain their secret collective designs as a part of plot against the integrity of Pakistan? In this situation, where is our leaders' strategy to handle this global conspiracy? This is also an important question, that what will be the future of peace talks between our government and Taliban committees in the presence of this global conspiracy? Today, we will discuss all the aspects of these major issues inside and outside the country that are happening and that are brewing. As you know, in my show, I have Mr. Zaid Hamid that joins me. Assalamu alaikum, Mr. Zaid Hamid. Mr. Zaid Hamid, as you saw the whole week that we observed and we try to collectively put it together, we observed Kashmir Solidarity Day on Wednesday in Pakistan. And as you know, that how Kashmir issue has been there since 66 years, and so far nothing has come out in a positive direction. But before we start our discussion, we would like to have a report on Kashmir, and we would like to see what Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Nehru has to say on this issue. Let's have a look at that first.
The Kashmir dispute is the oldest unresolved international conflict in the world today. It is the oldest dispute at the UN agenda. Pakistan considers Kashmir as its core political dispute with India. So does the international community accept India. India's forcible occupation of the state of Jammu and Kashmir in 1947 is the main cause of the dispute. India claims to have signed a controversial document, the Instrument of the Accession, on 26 October 1947 with the Maharaja of Kashmir, in which the Maharaja obtained Indians' military help against popular insurgency. The people of the Kashmir and Pakistan do not accept the Indian claim. There are doubts about the very existence of the Instruments of Accession. The United Nations also does not consider Indian claims as legally valid. It recognizes Kashmir as a disputed territory. The fact is that all the principles on the basis of which the Indian subcontinent was partitioned by the British in 1947 justify Kashmir becoming a part of Pakistan. The current agitation in Indian-held Kashmir is rooted in the struggle of the people for the exercise of the right of the self-determination. Peaceful processions, chanting, demands for freedom were fired upon by the Indian armies and police. Thousands of men, women and children were being killed or wounded by the Indian army.
We must remember that we have to take momentous decisions and handle grave issues facing us in the solution of the complex political problem of this great subcontinent inhabited by 400 million people.
Our pledge to the people of Kashmir, if you like, the people of this world, that this matter could be affirmed or cancelled by the people of Kashmir according to their wishes. We do not wish to win people against their will with the help of armed force, and if the people want to part company with us, they may go their own way and we shall go ours. We want no forced marriages, no forced unions.
Yes, Mr. Zaid Hamid, as you saw our report and you heard Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah's perspective on this very important Kashmir issue. And then on Wednesday, when we observed the Kashmir Solidarity Day, our Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, addressing in his session in Azad Kashmir, said, "We are ready to resolve Kashmir dispute with India with peaceful dialogue. Pakistan supports the stance of Kashmir resolution according to the wishes of its people." So today, after 66 years, where do you see this Kashmir issue going? Are we putting it behind us? Is it still our top priority in our national agenda?
You see, the world community first must understand that two greatest human rights crises in the world today, one of them is Palestine and other is Kashmir. And both festering wounds have been created by the British Empire. There is so much blood on the British Empire's hands, especially the Muslim blood primarily, that today, after 66 years, the Palestine and Kashmir both remain unresolved, both remain territories where blood of innocent civilians and citizens is flowing at the hands of the occupation forces, and both remain territories which are strong on the UN agenda, still unresolved. And the issue is that now the Palestinians and the Muslims of Kashmir have given up faith on the international community. They have no faith on the United Nations or on any other power for that matter. And over again, we have seen this in history, that people of Kashmir and Palestine have taken the matters into their own hands. The Palestinian Intifada and the Kashmiri uprising of the 1980s, almost simultaneously, the timings of both these uprisings are almost identical, almost same. The disputes are as old as each other, almost 66 years. And one land is occupied by the Hindu Zionists, another Muslim land is occupied by the Jewish Zionists. And both issues remain very close to the Muslim heart. You heard the speech of Pakistan's founding father on Kashmir, and then you heard also the speech of Indian founding father Nehru on what he said about Kashmir, that if people want to part ways, we would let them go. We don't want forced marriages and we don't want forced unions of the lands.
But the Indian leaders of today's time are doing the opposite of what Jawaharlal Nehru said.
This is precisely what we are saying, that no promise has been kept, either by the Indian rulers or by the international community or by the United Nations. And as a result now, after 66 years, Kashmir is now such a festering wound that this wound is going to explode into a regional, perhaps a nuclear war. Because if Pakistan, I repeat, if Pakistan could live without the land of Kashmir, it cannot live without the water from Kashmir.
But Mr. Zaid Hamid, if we analyze previously, we saw that Pervez Musharraf's times, he was the one who rejected, in a way, who said that the resolutions, UN resolutions are outdated, and let's talk about something out of the box. And he presented that 4 pointers agenda regarding Kashmir. So was this from Pervez Musharraf's times that the Kashmir issue started getting behind the scenes, started getting, you know, not in our priority list anymore in our national agenda?
What happened was, in the last 66 years, the government of Pakistan have catastrophically failed to represent Kashmir at the international level. The Palestinians have done a much greater, much better job at presenting the Kashmir cause at the international level to the world community. But Kashmir primarily remained a Pakistan's problem, not a Muslim problem. While the Arab world focused and spoke for Palestinians sometimes, but Kashmir was never the agenda of the Arab Muslims as well. It was never the agenda of Iranians or the Turks or in the Africa and the Muslims in the Africa. So it was primarily a catastrophic diplomatic failure of the successive Pakistani regimes that they could not internationalize the Kashmiri issue. They could not make the Kashmiri issue an issue of the Muslim Ummah. As a result, Kashmir remained landlocked, a dispute, bilateral dispute between Pakistan and India. And this is where the greatest failing was. And as a result, frustration started to build up in the Pakistani leadership as the decades passed by. Pakistan has fought 4 wars over Kashmir. War of 1948, War of 1965, War of 71, and War of Kargil in 19... And then Indians in 84 moved in across the Siachen line of control, again part of Kashmir, to capture Pakistan's part of Glacier. So there are constantly, in the last 66 years, both countries are in a constant state of war. There has never been peace, but temporary ceasefire.
How would you categorize when Pervez Musharraf when Pervez Musharraf declared that the Pakistani land will not be allowed to get used for cross-border terrorism? and suggested that UN resolutions are outdated and it's about time to look into the out-of-box solutions. How do you see his perspective?
See, that's what I'm saying.
Kashmir issue?
That's what I'm saying. The frustration started to sink into Pakistani leadership, and they started to deviate from the established moral high ground that we had on Kashmir always. The people of Kashmir at the time of partition voted for Pakistan. At the time of partition stood to be part of Pakistan. The word K in Pakistan stands for Kashmir. Pakistan's founding father said that Kashmiri land and people and the territory is the jugular vein of Pakistan. And it was the part of the division plan that the Muslim majority areas will go to Pakistan. And it was brutally violated. And the fact is that against all norms of humanity and international law, Kashmir was forcibly occupied by an occupation force, Indian occupation force, just like Palestine has been occupied by a Zionist Jewish occupation force. So now in this time and age, when there is so much talk of human rights, right of self-determination, giving freedom to the lands and people, where East Timor was separated, where South Sudan was divided, where so many countries, Yugoslavia was balkanized, where Kurds are being given a separate land on the basis of their ethnicity and their demands, where Pakistan's Balochistan is being dismembered under the same argument of giving right of self-determination to people.
Mr. Zaid,
Why can't
we'll
this
take a break here. We will take a break here. Nazreen, stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back, viewers. We're talking about how we do observe Kashmir Solidarity Day every 5th of February every year. But where do we see this Kashmir issue in our national agenda? Why in our new army doctrine this Kashmir issue has been replaced by the internal factors rather than this being having the topmost priority, or the India being having the topmost priority? It's been replaced by the internal factors being the most threatening factor for the country. Mr. Zaid Hamid, we talked about how the Kashmir issue, we do not see it as it should be in our national agenda. And then if we come down to the new army doctrine, we do not see Kashmir or India as a major threat to Pakistan. General Kayani has replaced, he has announced that the internal factors of Pakistan are the most dangerous threat to Pakistan than India or the Kashmir issue. Why this replacement? Why this change of factors?
See, I would like to clarify that. I would like to disagree with this assessment that India has not remained the biggest threat for Pakistan. The fact is, what the Pakistan army is saying is that while we can handle the Indian threat because of the nuclear doctrine that we have, our immediate, bigger and more bloody threat that we are facing right now is because of the internal insurgencies. The point is that even right now, as
but then isn't the internal insurgencies are also being planted by India?
This is the point.
So why this replacement?
You see, this is the point. What is happening is that Indians are not rolling in their tanks right now into Pakistan because they feel that Pakistan army is still intact. Pakistan's nuclear doctrine is strongly deployed. Pakistan has the capability of even tactical nuclear weapons which can stop an Indian invasion into Pakistan. But Pakistan must be softened enough first through insurgencies, rebellions, internal political chaos, and this internal disintegration, internal implosion. Once that critical level is achieved, only then Indians feel comfortable that they would be able to roll into Pakistan. And this is where the Kashmir dispute becomes absolutely critical for Pakistan, because even right now as we speak, our armies are deployed eyeball to eyeball against each other. Kashmir is never considered an international border, even bilaterally between the two countries. It's a line of control. Whichever army can grab whichever hill, whichever valley, they do it. Indians did it in 1984 when they moved in, changed the line of control, captured Siachen. In 1998, Pakistan army moved in and captured Kargil and the Kargil hills and heights. And this is a war that's constantly going on, even while supposedly there is peace between the regular armies on the main international border. Kashmir is not an international border. It's a disputed line. So what we are saying is that flashpoint militarily also exists, And now, especially when India is building almost 100 dams over the Pakistani rivers, almost drying up Pakistan, turning Pakistan into a barren desert. This is something where Pakistan, as I said, we could wait for 66 years to let the international community decide the Kashmiri dispute, but we cannot remain thirsty for next 60 years. Next couple of years, Pakistan will become a water-starved country because of the dams that India is constructing.
But
we
then,
will have to
Mr.
go to
Zaid
war.
Hamid, our leadership is focusing on the bilateral trade with India, and they're focusing on improving their relations with India. So do you think that having the Kashmir issue standing right there as it is, the leadership should be proceeding in this direction?
You see, the leadership, we very, very strongly believe, has already been compromised. They are treacherous to the limit of being insane. Because if Pakistan would be destroyed, they would be destroyed with it as well. And that's what madness is, mutually assured destruction. Because if Pakistan becomes barren...
But then Mr. Zaid Hamid, didn't Pervez Musharraf start this out-of-the-box solution, and didn't he start this thinking that we can resolve the Kashmir issue later, but let's improve the other relations? Now, as a lot of perspectives are coming up, and they say that today and today's time and age is about economical alliances, it's about political alliances, it's not about military wars. So seeing all that, we can develop the bilateral trade relations between the two countries and then get the Kashmir issue resolved.
See,
how do you see this new stigma of today's century?
One word: insanity. If India is blocking Pakistan's water, what kind of trade and economy and agriculture you would have in Pakistan, which is turned into a barren desert land? Pakistan is an agrarian society. We depend on our food that we grow. We are a food surplus country. Our entire survival depends on the water that we have from Kashmir. They stop our water. They steal our water. They completely turn us barren and dry, destroy our crops and food supply. And then they say, let's have trade. Insanity. Can't happen. And this is what the government is doing. They are ignoring Kashmir. They are ignoring water. You never hear this government talking about the water issue or water disputes with India. But you do hear that you have built dams on our rivers, so we will buy electricity from your dams, legalizing them, buy electricity, but keep our water. You can steal our water, but we will buy expensive electricity from you. This is what we are saying, pure and simple insanity. This is absolute madness.
Sure.
And what this government is doing is a national collective suicide.
Okay, we will talk on another issue that's been brewing, and we have a sort that we would like to have a look at it, in which U.S. Congressman is talking about Balochistan, how Balochistan is being ignored if it's being as a state of Pakistan. But if Balochistan gets separated from Pakistan, then Balochs can get a better rights and better way of living in that separate independent state. Let's have a look at that first.
Baloch leaders from the Baloch area, the Balochistan area of Pakistan. It's the area where most of Pakistan's minerals are located. It's an area where Pakistan has, for many years, terrorized the Baloch people, killed them, just persecuted them mercilessly. They want the Baloch area's minerals and assets to keep Pakistan going and basically radicalized. It's time to look at encouraging a new Baloch state, a new country of Balochistan as independent of Pakistan, so that the people can live in peace, so they don't have to be worried about Pakistan officials and military coming through and committing really crimes against these people.
Yes, Mr. Zaid Hamid, as you saw that U.S. Congressman standing in U.S. House and saying and supporting an independent Balochistan. And they're saying that Baloch, and then you heard the other person saying that if you do a referendum tomorrow, Baloch will vote for an independent Balochistan. So why is U.S. after separating Balochistan from Pakistan?
You see, these are perhaps the most outrageous examples of how U.S. is trying to dismember Muslim lands, and particularly Pakistan as well now. And this is the fifth generation war that we have been talking about. Changing of the maps of the Middle East and the greater Middle East Muslim lands, especially of Pakistan. from Kashmir, if the same argument is picked up, which this US congressman, and before that Colonel Rolf Peter, that you heard him, he was speaking that people are being persecuted, people want separation and independence, but the same logic can be applied on Kashmir as well. But they ignore Kashmir because that supports their ally, the Hindu Zionist India, and now they are focusing outrageously on breaking Pakistan. A congressman speaking in US Congress is like, for example, how would they feel if a Pakistani parliamentarian stands up in Islamabad, speaks in parliament and says it's time we should separate Texas from United States because the US white people have been persecuting the indigenous Red Indians for 200 years. And they have killed hundreds of thousands of, or perhaps millions and millions of Red Indians to occupy North America. That's why it's time to dismember the North American Federation. If this kind of speech comes from a Pakistani parliament, a parliamentarian makes it, what do you think? How would the world react to it? And
well, the US will raise hell on all
and
this.
Here is the
what
atrocity.
did we do from our end, from our diplomatic end? What was the role of our government what was the response to this from our government?
And the government is totally silent. And before that, you heard Colonel Rolf Peter. He is the man, he is actually a snake. He is the one who's actually orchestrated this entire division of Greater Middle East. In 2002, he had written a paper. He had taken out a map also that how the Muslim world should be divided on bloodlines. What they believe is that after the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire was dismembered, all these Muslim countries that you see today were created out of the Ottoman Empire. Once the Ottoman Empire was dismembered, after the First World War, the British Empire moved in to create Israel. The movement was started to create Israel, and the Muslim lands were dismembered. But they say now, after 100 years, they say the division was done artificially, but now we must divide the Muslim lands on bloodlines. Bloodline means we should separate the Baluch areas in one corner, separate the Pashtuns in one segment, separate the Kurds somewhere else, separate the Shias in certain countries. So now
Mr. Zaid Hamid, did you hear one more thing that he said, US congressman said in his speech, that since the terrorist supply goes through Balochistan, so if they separate the Balochistan, it would be easier to control that and to save the world from terrorism.
You see, we have been saying that for years now, and the cat is out of the bag. You heard it yourself. The way they did in Libya, what the American forces did, they created a rebellion in Benghazi first. The NATO forces landed. Tripoli was in the hand of Gaddafi, but Libya was already divided. Benghazi was a port which was in the hand of the NATO and the American forces, and from there they pushed on towards Tripoli. Similarly, now what the Americans' plan is, and they have been practicing this for last 7 or 8 years, which we have been saying openly in the Pakistani media as well, that Americans want to take over Gwadar, the port of Gwadar, from where they get a very short access into Afghanistan. And Balochistan is the most thinly populated province of Pakistan. We have very limited army there.
But it would be easily controlled by US.
If an Americans directly intervene, because the Baloch separatists who are in Balochistan number no more than 10 or 20,000 people. They are separatists, they are based in Switzerland, they are based in Afghanistan, they are based in America and London.
But Mr. Zaid Hamid, you're talking about the Baloch separatists. We have seen the news also saying that top US congressman delegation meeting with 2 exiled Baloch leaders, Harbayar Murray and Khan of Khalat in London, in which US assured them it's best to highlight their movement in Balochistan. So all these puzzle pieces, if you put together, US is highly interested in Balochistan, especially in separating it from Pakistan.
We are raising the alarm here now. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that an invasion of the Americans, a covert clandestine CIA support to the insurgents, and the plan to dismember Balochistan from Pakistan and create as an independent Balochistan, just like they are doing to independent Kurdistan, the plan is already in the advanced stages. And US government is actively involved, not just the CIA. The US Congress, the US State Department, they are aggressively involved, because in that way they will not just cut a corridor for themselves into Afghanistan, they will dismember Pakistan, which which would also encircle Iran in one axis, dismember Pakistan. But again, remember this.
But Mr. Zaid Hamid, now the question arises that if they're leaving from Afghanistan at the end of 2014, then why would they be interested in Balochistan to access Afghanistan?
You see, please try to understand one point. Afghanistan was never their objective. Their entire objective of waging a war in this region was to denuclearize Pakistan. Pakistan is the only Islamic country which has nuclear weapons which are capable to reach Delhi as well as Tel Aviv. Pakistan is the balancing factor in the greater Middle East and in the greater South Asia.
Mr. Zaid Hamid, I have to take a break here. We will continue this discussion that why US is interested in separating Balochistan from Pakistan. Viewers, stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back, viewers. We're discussing on the national and international threats to Pakistan. We just showed you the clip before going on a break that how a U.S. congressman standing in the U.S. House and supporting and assuring the separation and independent Balochistan from Pakistan. Why is U.S. interested in Pakistan? Why is U.S. interested in separating Balochistan from Pakistan? Before we proceed with our discussion, Mr. Zaid Hamid, we would like to show you a report on Balochistan, that what does this province means to Pakistan and why is this so much important to U.S. and other Pakistani factors that are interested in Pakistan?
A delegation of the U.S. congressmen accompanied by top officials from the U.S. State Department met two exiled Baloch leaders and assured them for the open and clandestine help in their activities in Balochistan and abroad. Khan of Kallat, Mir Suleiman Khan Daud and Hamid Murray held talks with the delegation of U.S. congressmen at a central London location. The two exiled leaders asked the U.S. official to step up support for their efforts. Some of the representatives from the U.S. delegation have been meeting the Baloch exile leaders for many months. There is a great level of suspicion that elements of the U.S. establishment are deeply involved in Balochistan and have been helping some armed Baloch groups directly and indirectly. For several years, Hamid Murray and Khan of Kallat have been living in exile in London. Both have been given asylum status by the British government. Mehran Murray and Barhamadak Bukhti, who have been given asylum by the Swiss government. Some U.S. congressmen have been showing increasing interest in the recent months for the resource-rich Balochistan. Now the Balochistan government is set to take the central lead that appoints its own intermediaries to initiate negotiations with Baloch insurgents. The Balochistan cabinet will appoint negotiating committees similar to the one appointed by the federal government for talk with Taliban intermediaries to open dialogue with Baloch militant, he added.
Yes, Mr. Zaid Hamid, as you saw in our report as well, the increasing interest of U.S. in Balochistan. And then before going on the break, I asked you that why would U.S. be interested in Balochistan now when they're leaving from Afghanistan? How would they access Afghanistan even if they get their access to Balochistan?
You see, that's what I replied to you, that why did they come into Afghanistan in the first place? The entire objective of U.S. presence in Afghanistan was to dismember Pakistan, denuclearize Pakistan, support insurgencies in Balochistan and in the Pashtun belt through TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pentagon as we call it, through them to implode Pakistan from within to such an extent that world community moves in saying that Pakistan is a dysfunctional failed state and its nuclear weapons should be taken away. And now they feel that now they cannot sustain high intensity presence in Afghanistan for long, and they are in a hurry now. And that's why you see, while they are leaving Afghanistan, taking out bulk of their forces, they're still trying to keep a foothold there, but now directly supporting the Baloch insurgents, directly supporting the TTP insurgents, and directly patronizing the Indians on one axis to prepare against Pakistan. You see, Americans will never land into Afghanistan unless they create a distraction for Pakistan army on the eastern front or on the Afghan front. That's why the TTP is there. That's why the Indian Army's Cold Start doctrine is there. Once all these three forces, the Baloch Liberation Army or separatist in Balochistan, the Sindhi separatist in interior Sindh, MQM in Karachi, Indians in the east, and TTP in Afghanistan. All these forces will act in tandem.
if we see the U.S. development towards Balochistan, and then we see the relations of U.S. and Indian Narendra Modi, what would be the new relations between Narendra Modi and U.S.?
You see, Narendra Modi, the butcher of Gujarat, is coming to power. He's the man who has been refused visa all over the world because he burns people alive. He has burned thousands of Muslims alive and danced over their dead bodies. And world knows it. Everything is documented and recorded. And now he's going to become the Indian Prime Minister. So this is a dilemma for the world, especially for the Obama administration. How would they deal with him? And they know it. And Obama has already said this. The administration has already said, we may have problems with Narendra Modi, but our relationship with India are far strategic, far greater. So that means now the background, the past history of this butcher of Gujarat will be forgiven, forgotten, will never be mentioned in media. And now he'll become the next brother of Obama in the South Asian region with sole agenda of dismemberment of Pakistan.
So
and
they will shake hands together.
They will not just that they will shake hands, they will embrace. And not just that, they will wage a war in tandem against Pakistan. From Kashmir to Balochistan, from Peshawar to Karachi, Pakistan has been turned into an anarchic battlefield, as we call in the next 5th generation war. If those who cannot see are either deaf, dumb or blind, because now we have reached a point of no return. Americans have committed themselves to it.
Then the recent step of Obama administration last Wednesday, they froze the assets of 3 Haqqani network suspects, Saadullah Jan, Yahya Haqqani and Muhammad Umar Zadran. And David Cohen said that today's action underscores our resolve to continue targeting any potential support for Haqqanis. So now is the Obama administration winding down their final moves of the 12-year fight in Afghanistan?
You see, first, all these 3 names that you have taken are from the Mullah Umar's group. They are Afghan resistance who are fighting against the Americans inside Afghanistan. And none of them keep bank accounts. So freezing the bank accounts or putting restriction on them is nothing but a farcical joke. So, but the point is that Americans have always remained at war with 2 forces in this region. They've remained at war with Afghan Pashtuns and they've remained at war with Pakistani state. And now, they have been defeated in Afghanistan. Their war has become so expensive that they could not continue it any further. So they're not leaving Afghanistan. They're only reducing their size. They'll keep the footprint, they'll keep the bases. And once Karzai leaves, in the next elections which are coming in May or June approximately, the next president would sign the agreement which Karzai is refusing to sign. So the Americans are comfortable. Whoever comes, Abdullah comes or Ahmed Zia comes or whoever comes into power in Afghanistan, Americans are now counting on him. That Karzai will not sign the agreement, so next president will. And once Narendra Modi comes into power, next president comes into Afghanistan, Americans get their agreement signed, they'll be most comfortably placed even with a lesser footprint. And now, when they're reducing the main bulk of their forces from Afghanistan, they'll be supporting more to the insurgent and terrorist group. Clandestine support would increase. Americans have even practiced amphibious landing on the Makran coast and the Balochistan coastline. They have been practicing this for the last 7 years.
Mr. Zaid Hamid, let me share this with you. The International Institute for Strategic Studies and the senior expert, Brigadier Ben Berry from that IISS, says that Afghan Talibans are living in a fantasy world. It's going to be extremely difficult for them to achieve their objectives after Western troops leave Afghanistan. Afghan security forces are thoroughly in control of counterinsurgency. So who's living in fantasy world? Afghan Talibans or US?
This man has to be insane. He has to be a complete crackpot, a dope-eating nutcase. If the US and the NATO forces could not resist against Taliban, with all their industrial and military might, what chance does the Afghan National Army has? I'm asking you a simple question. The fact of the matter is the Afghan National Army would disintegrate on the first 10 days of the withdrawal, of the total withdrawal of the US forces. The fact of the matter is, yes, the Panjsheris will fight. The Panjsher is a separate army itself. Within the Afghan National Army, there are multiple power groups, and one of them is the Panjsheri National Army. Of course, they'll put up a good fight, no doubt. And of course, that also remains a fact that Afghanistan will not come to a peace. There would be a civil war. But again, a civil war in Afghanistan is far better than a war against occupation forces where CIA, RAW, Mossad, and NATO forces are present dismembering Pakistan. A civil war would never dismember Pakistan. They'll be more focused on grabbing the power in Kabul. not on supporting the insurgencies in Pakistan or denuclearizing Pakistan, which is the objective of the foreign forces and the Indians.
But how do you justify saying this, Mr. Zaid Hamid, that civil war would be in benefit of Pakistan?
You see, that already
there will be casualties
you see,
within
one
Afghanistan
thing is,
in that civil
no
war?
war is good, but already there is a war going on in Afghanistan, and that war has decimated Pakistan totally. From 1996 to 2001, Taliban were in power in Kabul, and there was a civil war. Taliban were fighting the Tajiks, they were fighting the Uzbeks, they were fighting the Hazaras. A civil war was going on. So there is a past historical example in front of us. But that civil war never spilled into Pakistan. There were no suicide bombings. There were no car bombings. There were no Baluch insurgency. There was no rebellion of the TTP. And there was absolutely no deployment of Pakistani troops on the Afghan border, despite the fact that there was an internal civil war going on in Afghanistan.
So you're saying that since Taliban, Afghan Talibans would be coming in after US troops leave, the NATO troops leave from Afghanistan, that's why US is getting more and more interested in Balochistan, so that they can have one land close to Afghanistan to keep an eye on those Talibans.
Even if the Americans leave Afghanistan totally, Balochistan is a completely independent project. Dismemberment of Balochistan remains a critical project in any case for the US State Department, US Congress and CIA. And that's why you find them very active now in these last stages when they have seen that Pakistan has been the hardest country to break. They dismembered Iraq in weeks. They dismembered Libya in weeks. They have demolished Syria in just a couple of years. But for the last 12 years, 13 years, they're trying to demolish Pakistan, and Pakistan stays strong. And now they have decided to move in aggressively to actually physically start intervening into Pakistani territory and dismembering Pakistani territory, Pakistani lands.
Now, after this speech of US congressman in US House and saying very openly about how Balochistan should be an independent state and how they're saying that Balochs would be more willingly to get separated from Pakistan than to stay together with Pakistan, what is the diplomatic response from the government of Pakistan to this? In a diplomat form, have they responded to US?
You see, this is what we are saying. I mean, you can't, the Pakistani state is being betrayed and auctioned off by its own political leadership, by its own judiciary, by its own media. And that's why only the armed forces remain the only institution which are still united, still strong, still nuclear capable to defend the country. But this kind of response should have come from Pakistan's Foreign Office, but they have pretended to ignore it, as if this statement does not mean anything. The meeting of the US State Department with the separatist groups offering them clandestine support to dismember Balochistan has been ignored by Pakistan's Foreign Office and the Prime Minister. And this is absolutely shameful, unpardonable. And now, when, as you see, as you just mentioned, that the Balochistan government is forming its own committee to have peace deals with the separatists, what value would those peace deals have when the actual backers are the US State Department, Congress and the CIA? When the game is so huge that separatists themselves wouldn't have any say in what to do next when Americans have decided to support them. Because in the end what will happen is, let me give you one brief analysis, is that Balochistan is, the Baluch separatists is, Balochistan is almost 8 million people. The population of entire Balochistan is almost 8 million, and out of 8 million, about 60% are Pashtuns. And Pashtuns are not separating. They will never break away from Pakistan. And out of the 40%, majority of Baluchis are very strongly patriotic and pro-Pakistan. So actually the insurgent forces are not more than 10 to 15,000 fighting men.
So what you're talking about is this Harbiar Murray and Khan of Khalad that met in London with US congressmen. They hold just 5 to 10,000.
Only 10 to 15,000 fighting men only. And with that level of force, they can never separate Balochistan. Impossible. They can blow up railway lines, they can blow up power lines or gas lines, but nothing beyond that. They can assassinate few people, but nothing beyond that. Americans will have to physically intervene, and American Marines have been practicing, amphibious divisions have been practicing landing in Balochistan previously in the name of anti-narcotics operations. And this is, we have been raising this alarm for last many years, and now the chickens have come home to roost. The end game has begun with the rise of Narendra Modi, as we said, in India, with the coming of a new president in Afghanistan, with the evacuation of main American forces from Afghanistan, the American intrusion aggressively into Balochistan, and their support to the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pentagon, and their urban insurgency in Karachi and Sindh. Pakistan is well and truly encircled with the most incompetent, corrupt and treacherous government in place. That's why we say Pakistan in this particular year, 2014, is going to be one of the most decisive and most bloody year in Pakistan's recent history. It's make and break time for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zaid. Hamid. Viewers, as you saw, we discussed about the Kashmir Day, the Kashmir issue, and the question is that where does Kashmir issue stands in our national agenda? Secondly, we discussed about the Balochistan, the U.S. recent interest in separating of Balochistan from Pakistan. Why is U.S. interested? Why is U.S. congressman standing in the U.S. House and saying that Balochistan needs to be separated from Pakistan, and Baloch would be much happier in a separate Balochistan state? That's it for tonight. See you all next Sunday. Until then, Allah Hafiz and good night.